Hello guys, although much of this video is devoted to the late Virginia Giuffre, the former Virginia Roberts, this isn't for my full-swept timeline. I'm not going to put this on a full-swept timeline. I'm concentrating here on the conspiratorial aspects. The sex is irrelevant, as it were, whatever sex there was. Virginia Giuffre committed suicide recently by taking an overdose, apparently. She was 41 years old, and so much garbage has been written about this woman, fittingly really, because she was garbage. Here's from the Evening Standard, for example. Virginia Giuffre's "no way suicide" tweet resurfaces after death. I am making it publicly known that in no way, shape or form am I suicidal. I have made this known to my therapist and GP. If something happens to me, in the sake of my family, yes, in the sake of my family, not for the sake of my family, in the sake of my family, do not let this go away and help me to protect them. Too many evil people want to see me quieted. I mean, this has set off all manner of people, and the statement is garbage. Diana, Princess of Wales, said something similar. She thought her husband, or estranged husband, Prince Charles, would kill her by staging a car crash, and she died in a car crash. But rather than being any sign of any kind of prophecy or inside knowledge, this was the working of a woman who was severely distressed, let's put it that way. I saw Diana in the flesh once. She filled the room, but the former Virginia Roberts did not do that. And her death is, I mean, the cranks have crawled out of the woodwork. Progressives especially, they don't do any research, or if they do, they follow narratives. Sabrina Salvati is a so-called progressive. She was spouting off about it. It can't be suicide. Viva Frey should know better. Whitney Webb appeared on the Salvati channel. She was whittering on about all sorts of stuff. But she also linked in Sean Combs and Naomi Campbell to Jeffrey Epstein. Well, I mean, they join up imaginary dots all over the place, these people. Naomi Campbell is or was a quite famous, world-famous fashion model. Sean Combs has his own problems at the moment to do with some bizarre sexual stuff. The fact that wealthy people know each other, that, I mean, Combs it's not my kind of music, but he was a big star in music and businessman. Let's say Campbell's world famous. The fact that these sort of people find themselves moving in the same circles as the super rich, so what? Yeah, Combs was not super rich himself, but extremely wealthy. No doubt Campbell is too. Michael Franchese, who used to be a mafioso, he's spouting this rubbish as well. It's just absolute garbage. Lady Victoria Harvey has done a lot of work on this case, and on May the 1st she appeared with Piers Morgan on a panel of clowns discussing in particular this photograph. There's been a lot of speculation about that photograph. Lady Victoria insists it's fake. I'm not prepared entirely to rule that out, but I think it's almost certainly genuine. She, on the Piers Morgan programme on YouTube, she revealed that she'd been to the house where it was taken, Ghislaine Maxwell's house in a very exclusive area of London. She went there, said she went there posing as a buyer with a photographer and another friend. I think she'd done the photographer 30 years, since she was 18. She doesn't look, however old she is, she doesn't. I think she's an amazing woman. That opinion is not shared by, well, it wasn't shared by Tom Bower or some idiot journalist who appeared on the programme. David Boyes, the bent lawyer who bankrolled this chiselling little whore. Let's call Giuffre what she was, chiselling little whore. Lady Victoria, right or wrong, she's a woman who's put her money where her mouth is. She's done a lot of work on this. I think she's probably been misled, but I do not for one moment question her veracity, her sincerity, and she's done a lot of work beside that. Now I want to show you another photograph. That is another quite infamous photograph. It shows the serial killer John Gacy with Rosalind Carter, who was then First Lady of the United States. Gacy was active in democratic politics at a local level. That was May 1978. In December, he was arrested on suspicion of murder and confessed to murdering, well, altogether he was convicted of murdering 33 young men and boys. What does that photograph prove? Before going any further, I should mention that with old-fashioned photographs, be they Polaroids or, film, if you're old enough, you might remember when you had to develop film. Usually you should take it to the chemist. Genuine photographs can look fake. I've written about this elsewhere. Also, genuine photographs can be touched up. They can move objects around. They can put clouds in a clear blue sky. So, just because the photograph looks fake, I'll give an example. Again, I've made this example before. In the 7/7 attacks on London, when the terrorists they came down by train, and the CCTV images of them going through the ticket barrier, and in at least one of them, it looks as though this guy hasn't got an arm, or his arm is going through the barrier. CCTV is, I'm not sure what it would have been then, just video. It might be tape, but a poor quality camera is a bit like a poor quality radio or record player. If you play a record do you remember record players? If you have a poor quality radio and you hear somebody singing on it, or a new piece of music, it doesn't sound the way it should sound. Well, same as with a camera, be it a still camera or moving camera, the image may not conform to reality. It's complicated. And of course, now where everything is digital, you don't know what is true and what isn't. But even 100 years ago and more, they were doing fake photographs. I mean, a bloke named Mumler was doing fake photographs in the 1870s and before. William Mumler, 1860s, I think. Ghost photographs, spirit photographs are called. So the fact that a photograph looks fake doesn't mean it is fake, and the fact that it looks genuine doesn't mean it's genuine. But anyway, that's an aside. Now let's move on to, let's progress. People who think Giuffre's death was not suicide, it was suspicious, are talking to the anus. They haven't done any research. Suicide is quite a common cause of death. It's about 2%. I've known two people who committed suicide. one at 19 and one at 27. Quite a lot of celebrities have committed suicide. Bob Merrill, who wrote the song How Much Is That Dog in the Window, and he committed suicide at 78, shot himself. Keith Emerson of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, he shot himself because he had a problem with his hand. He was a keyboard player and he couldn't play the keyboard anymore. Robin Williams, he committed suicide. I think he was about 64. You can look these things up. So there's nothing necessarily sinister about that. I've been living in this house since 1986, and there have been half a dozen people have died. I was the first to move in after it was converted to flats. A guy named O'Leary moved into the ground floor, I think the following year, and he walked out of the house in his shirt sleeves, got on a boat to Ireland, and next thing I know, the policeman at the door telling me he was dead. Tom, who lived in the same flat, died in 2004. He was there, I think it was the next, I think he moved in immediately after O'Leary, so he was there for a long time. There have been other people who died as well. People down the street, there was one guy who was, I think, 34, 3 or 4 doors down. So, people die, and it isn't necessarily suspicious. The Clinton death list, I just mentioned the Clinton death list here. This is a complete load of rubbish. Hillary Clinton is older than me, so she's definitely met a lot more people than I have. And if you look at the Clinton death list, one of the people who died was a Clinton bodyguard who committed suicide when Bill was in the White House, a bodyguard from Arkansas. There was a lawyer who was meant to have committed suicide. He was actually piloting his plane and it crashed. There was another lawyer who I think shot himself because he had his hand in a till. What lawyers are extremely well paid, and this is human nature, or lawyer nature. So the fact that this woman committed suicide, there's nothing suspicious at all about it. And she was having problems in her marriage, which I know that were entirely her fault. Right, going back to that Piers Morgan programme, David Boise, earlier at another hangout, Morgan said that Boise was paid $2,000 an hour. $2,000 an hour, and there was no correction from the lawyer. Sweet Virginia was paid $160,000 for that photograph story. 160,000 divided by 2,000. 40 hours, less than 2 days' work. Less than 2 days. And $2,000 an hour, even $1,000 an hour, it adds up. So it was clearly something sinister going on there. He said he took her on because, basically for idealistic reasons, and he said he made her take a lie detector, and presumably she passed. Well, here are a few things which she didn't pass. He wrote an unpublished memoir, a fantasy novel, in effect, called The Billionaire's Playboy Club. I've got a copy of it on my hard disk. You'll find it online. But I'll read here just from, I'll put a link to this below. This is from Business Insider, which highlights some of the allegations she made in that memoir. So I'll put a link. This is an archive link because now it's a paywall, but this is an archive link before the paywall. These are the most significant allegations in Jeffrey Epstein accuser Virginia Roberts' unsealed memoir. Unsealed because it was used in a court case. This is by Becky Peterson. And in the 139-page expose deed, Giuffre describes how Ghislaine Maxwell found her at the age of 15 while working at President Trump's Mar-a-Lago. If she were 15, she wouldn't be working there. She was 16. She hadn't been working there long. Maxwell invited her to audition for a massage role, then groomed her for sex work, according to Giuffre. Giuffre also named several of the clients Epstein forced her to sleep with. Including businessman Rick Hilton and former Senator George Mitchell. She accuses Rick Hilton and Senator George Mitchell of having sex with a minor. Giuffre gives a first-hand account of the many rich and famous people who shared her social life with Epstein, including several men who she claims that Epstein forced her to have sex with when she was underage. In Florida, the age of consent is 18. In England, if a 16-year-old has sex with even a 50-year-old man, maybe you may not like it, but it isn't illegal. She also said Epstein made her have sex with Prince Andrew, including an act which involved a doll that resembled the prince. The prince was aware she was just 17, Giuffre said, in London. Giuffre said she was also forced, there's a bit of repetition here, also forced to sleep with former Senator and Disney chairman George Mitchell, as well as two academics. One is a Harvard professor whose first name is Stephen. His last name was published in a memoir but redacted from the files. The second she describes as a Nobel Prize winning scientist, whose name she also does not remember, because he never existed. In addition, Giuffre said that marine activist Alexandra Cousteau, the granddaughter of explorer Jacques Cousteau, from my generation, you may remember him, he was very famous. Alexandra Cousteau had sex with her at Epstein's insistence. Naturally, Epstein made large donations to charities related to Cousteau's causes. Giuffre also gives new colour to a relationship between Highbridge Capital co-founder Glenn Dubin and his wife Eva Anderson Dubin, who have been friendly with the disgraced financier for decades. In the memoir, Giuffre claims that Glenn had sex with her at the end of a massage after she was instructed by Epstein to meet the Dubins at the Breakers Hotel in Palm Beach. Before she met with Glenn, she gave a pregnant Eva a brief massage which involved fondling her breasts, then swollen from the pregnancy. Once Eva had fallen asleep, Giuffre said she went to another room to give Glenn an hours-long massage that ended in intercourse. Glenn and Eva Dubin are outraged by allegations in the unsealed court records, which are demonstrably false and defamatory, a spokesman told Insider. Unfortunately, they're not defamatory because they're published in court papers, which is why she did it. And she also falsely accused Alan Dershowitz. Now, this is quite important because Dershowitz is he's a very important person, very high profile, an academic, a lawyer, and a regular media pundit, and very distinctive. And she ended up, he said that he defamed her, so she sued him. Yeah. Who paid for that? I mean, this whole thing stinks to high heaven. He counterclaimed, and in a civil process, there's something called discovery. If you're not familiar with legal processes, you have to give discovery of documents which back up your case. And because she never met him, she had no evidence at all that she met him, she backed down. She said she may have or might have confused him with someone else because of the trauma she suffered. Dershowitz had previously said that he wanted to see her in prison, but he was extremely magnanimous here, and they settled the action. Well, no, he should have done that. He should have hammered over costs. All these allegations are BS, all of them, every single one. As Lady Victoria pointed out during the Piers Morgan programme, she even admitted that one of the allegations she made against Prince Andrew was false. Now, imagine you have a court case, and this is your star prosecution witness. She's caught in lie after lie after lie. How much credibility does she have? How much credibility does she have on this basis? None. Zero. And yet, we're told she was a courageous champion of... No, she wasn't. She recruited girls for Epstein. I've written articles about this and made videos. I'll put my link to my a playlist, but it's not disputed. Out of her own mouth, she's done this. She said this.
To me, still to this day, it is my biggest shame that I carry around that I will never get rid of. And I'm really, really sad that I brought other girls my age and even younger into a world that they should have never been introduced to.
When that photograph first emerged, she said that she'd had no sex with Andrew, and she wanted the photograph to show her mum, to send to her mother. And yet years later, I was being sexually abused by a member of the royal family. This is all bullshit, all of it, all lies. And people are going along with it. Conspiracy cranks. Cranks. And people who should know better but don't. Sean Atwood, after the day after, May the 2nd, after the Piers Morgan programme, Sean Atwood was trashing Lady Victoria. People have tried to make her out to be mad, or at least obsessed as well as a grifter. But she has enormous courage. She's put her money where her mouth is. Who are the real grifters? Sarah Ransom was another one. She wasn't recruited by Epstein as underage. She was a model, prostitute. Like Virginia Roberts, she was one of Epstein's willing whores. I've made this analogy before. Slender Man. The Slender Man case. This was 2014. Two 12-year-old girls in Wisconsin lured a third into the woods and stabbed, I think it was 29 times, including the heart. Miraculously, Peyton Leutner survived. These girls, they took a while to come to trial, but they're not right in the head. But they've been behind bars for a long time, and they should be behind bars for a lot longer. But that is that a 12-year-old has that much agency. She knows murder is wrong. A 16-year-old who recruits 14-year-olds to give a bloke sexual massages knows she's doing wrong. Isn't the crime of the century, but she's doing wrong. The whole thing is lie after lie after lie, lie after lie after lie. As I say, she was a co-conspirator of Epstein, a co-conspirator. Epstein got an easy, initially, a very easy sweetheart deal, if you like. But what I like you to do is compare Epstein's victims, call them victims if you want, with those of the grooming gangs, now the rape gangs in England. Epstein was paying slightly underage girls, 14, maybe 13, but mostly 14 to 16, paying them $200 a shot to give him sexual massages. No one accused him of rape at that time. I doubt very much if any of these allegations were true of rape. They were giving him sexual massages for $200 a time. The police took action. In this country, police turned a blind eye for years, for decades, to girls who are being raped. I mean, drugged, given alcohol, younger than that, and raped repeatedly by men, being abused by them physically. I think 2 girls were murdered. In one case, a guy firebombed this girl's house, and she was inside. I think it was her mother, and the child. Another girl died from a drug overdose. I mean, absolutely horrific. And this was abuse on an industrial scale. What Epstein did was he paid $200 a time for sexual massages. Okay, it's bad, but it isn't a crime of the century. And the idea that these girls were all damaged, traumatised. Look at women who really have been traumatised. Look at the Cleveland captives. Okay, Michelle Knight suffered. Well, she hasn't recovered as well as Anita Berry and Gina DeJesus, but they sound like Ivy League graduates instead of ordinary working class young women now. So whatever crimes Jeffrey Epstein did commit, and he did commit them, she was part of it. A lot of people are dissatisfied with what they consider a cover-up. I've looked at this in detail, and I really don't believe there was any sort of network here. We've seen this in Britain. We had the so-called VIP paedophile ring, which turned out to be total garbage. It was a bloke named Joel Beach who was making it up, and the police went along with it. There's the Elm Guest House. I'm going to put a link to this. Elm Guest House did exist, and it was basically a guest house which had a heavy homosexual clientele, and there was no sexual abuse there of anyone, but the cranks have built this up into something. There was out the Garane in Jersey, which is now. Let me tell you a bit how conspiracies really work, because I've had experience of this, personal experience, in the 1990s and the following decade. You know, if you have 4 police officers lying in unison, who's going to believe you? This happened to me. I don't want to talk about me though. I want to talk about 2 other people, Colin Stagg and Stefan Kisko. I actually spoke to Colin Stagg years ago. He was the first suspect, the prime suspect in the murder of Rachel Raquel, she was murdered on Wimbledon Common in July 1992. He became a suspect primarily because he was considered an oddball. He was a sexually experienced. I think he was a virgin at the time, and he called himself a pagan. He had a dog. He was unemployed and he lived in Wimbledon Common, and he walked the dog on the common. And some woman wrote to the police saying something about Stagg. So what did they do? They brought in an undercover female police officer to butter him up and to extract a confession from him. They considered he'd confessed to the murder, and the poor guy spent months, over a year, on remand. The case came to trial at the Central Criminal Court, and the judge literally shredded it, the so-called case against him. Operation Edsel, it was called. The judge was Sir Harry Ocknall, now deceased. He actually prosecuted the Hull arsonist, Bruce George Peter Lee. He named himself. He altered his name, changed his name to Bruce Lee, the martial artist. I actually saw Lee. I was in the courtroom when Lee was sentenced, so I saw him in person. But the judge shredded the case against Stagg, the non-case. The lead detective on the case wrote 2 books, at least 2 books. I think one was his memoirs, and he virtually said that Stagg got away with it. Well, years later, advanced DNA techniques showed that the real killer of Rachel Raquel was a sexual psychopath named Robert Napper. Napper was also known as the Green Chain Rapist, and in 1993, the year following the murder of Rachel Raquel, he murdered a young woman named Samantha Bissett and her daughter Jasmine. So they were quite prepared to stitch this poor guy up for the murder of Rachel Raquel, and it turned out he was completely innocent, absolutely 100% innocent. Although there will still be people today who believe he murdered Rachel Raquel. It's mad, but these allegations they never completely go away. The other case I'll mention is Stefan Kisko. This is really tragic. Stefan Kisko was a genuinely vulnerable man. He's been called intellectually disabled, but he actually worked for the Inland Revenue. He had quite a responsible job. He became a suspect for the murder of a young girl named Leslie Mulseed. This was 1975. It was complicated how he became a suspect. He he was accused of indecently exposing himself to two girls. What actually happened was that a milkman, in the days when there were milkmen, was taken short and he urinated in a doorway or something, and these girls saw him, and somehow it became Stefan Kisko who did this, who flashed these girls. He was convicted, he was tried and convicted, and he spent a decade and a half in prison, and he nearly went mad. Eventually he was cleared by forensic evidence, and later, after his death, the real perpetrator, a man named Castry, was convicted of the murder. Stefan Kisko was convicted because of a conspiracy between police officers, a barrister, and at least one forensic scientist. He died young, actually, Kisko. He died about a year after he was released from prison. This is the Rochdale Observer of 3rd of May 1995. Stipendiary magistrate Jane Hayward stayed the prosecution against former Chief Superintendent Richard Holland and forensic scientist Alan Elteridge. The grounds were length of time since the trial of Stefan Kisko in 1976, the deaths of a number of witnesses and people who took part in the trial, and the loss of a number of documents vital to the trial. The defence ran an abuse of process submission. So they cover up a crime for 15 years or more, and then they claim that they can't be brought to trial because they could get a fair trial because of the delay. This is like statute of limitations, where a woman will come forward. I love that phrase. They come forward and claim to have been raped 15 years ago. There should be statutes of limitations for reporting crimes, but not for covering them up, or for crimes that were reported at the time. That was absolute. That's how conspiracies. That's how real conspiracies work. The authorities sit on the facts, or they turn a blind eye to it. The grooming gang case. I just mentioned two others here now: the Kennedy assassination and the 9/11 attacks. For me, the Kennedy assassination is the litmus test of lunacy. We know everything about Oswald. I've written about this. I've bloviated about it online. Oswald was arrested within 2 hours of the murder, of the assassination. He was arrested for the murder of a police officer, J.D. Tippit, who saw him acting suspiciously. He murdered Tippit in cold blood, blew his head off. He was arrested by posse after he fled to the Texas Theatre cinema. They found the rifle, which he bought legally through mail order, photographs of him posing in the backyard. He'd used the same rifle to attempt to assassinate Edwin Walker, General Edwin Walker, 6 months or so prior to the Kennedy assassination. We know everything about Oswald, and yet it's a mystery. The conspiracies about Oswald started really because of his own murder by Jack Ruby. If Ruby hadn't got to Oswald, if he hadn't been paraded in public like that in police headquarters, he would have stood trial, he'd have been convicted, sentenced to death, executed, forgotten. Today nobody would know his name any more than people know the name of the assassin of Franz Ferdinand. Absolute ludicrous. And the 9/11, this idiot Gage, so-called architect, well, he's an architect, pushing this rubbish about Building 7. If you do some proper research on this, as with the Kennedy assassination, you find that there was no cover-up. Well, I say that there may have been Saudis in America who had some sort of relationship with the attackers, one or two of the attackers, and this was hushed up. Let me go back again to the Gacy photograph. Now imagine if somebody in the Carter administration had said this could be embarrassing to the president, and they covered it up and sort of suppressed the fact that Gacy had met the First Lady, and this comes to light years later. Does this mean that there was a conspiracy? There was a conspiracy for 9/11. It was a conspiracy of 19 men armed with box cutters who were financed by evil men from beyond these shores, beyond America's shores. Jason Burke, who wrote the book on Al-Qaeda, probably the definitive book on Al-Qaeda, said that the whole operation cost perhaps $250,000. You can't buy a house in London, you can't buy a garage in London for $250,000 now. So these people, they don't do any proper research. They come with these ludicrous garbage and all sorts of bad actors. People stirring up trouble just for the sake of it. I'll finish with returning to sweet Virginia. Virginia was a whore, and she was also a child sex trafficker. She didn't expose anything, right? After she married Robert Giuffre, she was lying low in Australia. The FBI turned up at her front door, and she said what she had to put Ghislaine in the frame. She wasn't regarded as a credible witness. That's why she didn't testify at Ghislaine's trial. And if she appeared at the trial at all, it would have been should have been as a co-defendant. She accused her husband of beating her, of abusing her. And yet he's the one who had the court order, the injunction against her. In Australia, that is something, because the Australian criminal justice system, certainly the family court system, has been totally corrupted by feminism. So, and her kids didn't want anything to do with her. So, who's the bad guy, him or her? No, she was trash. She, as Lady Victoria said, she destroyed so many reputations, and I don't think it was any great. I don't believe there's any sort of paedophile ring there. Jeffrey Epstein was mega rich, and he knew a lot of rich people. He socialised with them. Just because he socialised with them doesn't mean they knew anything about him. I mean, lots of people lived next door to murderers, serial killers. I mean, do you think the people who lived next to Fred and Rose West knew anything about what was going on in the house? Do you think the people who lived next door to Ian Brady and Amira Healy knew what was going on? Healy's grandmother didn't know what was going on. She lived there. So, no, I think the whole thing is all garbage. But there's a lot of money in the people making money on YouTube, grifters like Atwood, and people in the media. And if people's reputations, if the reputations of the rich and famous are dragged through the mud, who cares? Well, I care, actually. And so does Lady Victoria Harvey. So anyway, that's all I have to say about sweet Virginia and about conspiracies, real conspiracies and fake conspiracies. Do your own research, do some proper research. Start with police reports, if they're available, and don't fall for any of this garbage. Conspiracies are real, they exist, but this one, no.